Hilton brings you new ways to stay. With experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
That's your money saying it's time for a McDonald's run. Because with new McValue at McDonald's, you get more than you expect. Like buy a 6-piece McNuggets and add a McChicken for just $1. Your money says let's go. Get more than you expect with new McValue. Prices and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
Out here, there's no one way of doing things. No unwritten rules. And no shortage of adventure. Because out here, the only requirement is having fun. Bank of America invites kids 6 to 18 to golf with us. For a limited time, sign them up for a free 1-year membership, giving them access to discounted tee times at thousands of courses. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/golf with us. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Restrictions apply. See BofA.com/golf with us for complete details. Copyright 2025 Bank of America Corporation.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Welcome to episode 1 of The Edge with me, Eagles Eric. This is going to be a dynamic show. 1 week is going to be totally different from the next. We're going to have guests. We're going to do film breakdowns. Today, we're going to start off with a mailbag episode so you guys can really see my thought process and I can start to talk about content that you guys care about. So we're going to go through a ton of questions. There was an incredible amount of people who responded. So I picked out like the best 20. If you don't get in there, submit for next week. I'm going to try to answer as many questions as possible. You know, I'm doing this for you guys. So I'm going to get right into it here. So start off with question number 1. And this one's from Asa Arnold. And he asked, how much of Howie's success comes from his rock solid job security? Should struggling teams aim for long-term GM stability? And by the way, if you guys haven't seen, this guy makes his own content, really sharp kid. So you could go check him out on YouTube. But I think this is a phenomenal question. And the Eagles are in a unique situation. Job security allows a GM to make aggressive moves, you know, without the fear of being fired. And aggressive moves, to me, they really increase your range of outcomes. So you're taking on more variance as an organization. And so if you have poor talent evaluation, poor coaching staff, you may be even worse off than if you were conservative. But if those systems are high functioning, like they are with the Eagles, you have a much better chance of capitalizing on that higher ceiling via those aggressive moves. And that's what Howie's been able to do. So, you know, for struggling teams, I think the best bet is to really find your guy and give them the keys to the castle. And that's something we've seen with the Jaguars and Gladstone, and they made the biggest deal of the draft. Now, people said they gave up way too much, but in a draft like that where there's not a lot of blue chip talent, I think you can kind of justify giving up extra assets. And the thing is, if it doesn't work out, you can't just fire the guy. So terrific question there. Hopefully that was a good answer. And as we go through, I'll sprinkle in some questions from the comment section as well. So feel free to write in questions. This next one from @I'm actually Howie. If it is actually Howie, what's up? What is your season prediction? Do you have concerns about our schedule, the edge depth, and Kevin Patullo's play calling? Predictions are a funny thing for me due to the nature of injuries, high variance in one score game outcomes, and even just the overall parity year to year in the NFL. You could argue season predictions are an exercise in futility. I could say if everything transpires the way I'd expect it to on paper, this is what I think, but that doesn't happen. But obviously no one wants to hear that. They just want to hear my bold prediction. I think the Eagles may struggle to find their offensive identity, with an inexperienced offensive coordinator. But I think they'll find their stride later in the season like they did with Kellen Moore. Now, I think Kellen Moore has a lot better pedigree than Patullo. But I'm not ready to make any conclusions about him because there's just not enough information. And that's something probably by the time we get to week 10, I'll have a fairly good handle of his approach. I think the defense may struggle against teams that commit to the run. It was a funny thing last year where the second half of the season through the playoffs, there was hardly any teams that challenged them in the run game. And it really benefited the Eagles, played right into their hands. And I think this speaks a little bit to what you mentioned about concerns about edge depth. They have 1 million designated pass rushers, but they don't have any bona fide run stuffers. So I hope they bring someone in, and later in this episode, we'll talk a little bit more about potential people they could do, how they could fortify the edge in early downs. I think the secondary has a chance of being just as good, if not better, than last year. Obviously they lost Slay and Gardner Johnson, but Q and DeJean have another year under their belt. And I project Campbell as a great off-ball linebacker from day one. And I think Makuba may turn out to be more reliable in coverage than Gardner Johnson. Probably won't have as many impact plays. I will, as much as I was not the highest guy on Gardner Johnson, he probably made one big play a game, especially in the latter half of the season, and that's valuable. I think Makuba will play a little bit more conservatively. Now, he does have good instincts and a hair trigger when he sees it. And so there's where you maybe get a few interceptions. But in terms of coming up on a fourth down run fit like Gardner Johnson did a few times and stonewalling someone in the backfield, I don't really envision that for him. So good question. I should mention, as probably halfway through, there's a little bonus. Everyone whose question gets up here, you'll be entered in for a nice prize that we will give out when we hit 5,000 subscribers. All right. Next, from @MovesXD, who's an under the radar free agent the Eagles could still sign? And I've went through the free agent list pretty exhaustively, and the cupboard is bare, admittedly. There's one guy who is appealing to me, and it's Zadarius Smith. I project him getting roughly 8 to 10 million for a 1-year contract. Now, this may not be feasible at all. If the Eagles still want to move Huff or Goddard, they really don't have space to sign a guy like that. Now, they can always do their cap wizardry where they add on a bunch of void years, and ultimately they could get the first year cap hit down to peanuts, like 2 million, and then they could fit him. But it's at a certain point, it's are you going to bring in another designated pass rusher and take on that dead money later? I'm not sure if that's going to happen. And there's no edges that are good run stuffers to speak of. So I do wonder if they're just going to lean on Hunt on early downs the entire season. So great question there. Next, we're going to go to Mellow Hype. What camp competitions are you most looking forward to? That's a very good question. I think a lot of Eagles fans will have the same answer, which is the cornerback competition and the edge competition. I think edge 2 especially on passing downs is completely up for grabs. We mentioned it earlier. Uche, Ojolari, Pal Ryland, even Hunt to some extent are all players that kind of are better in pass rush situations than stuffing the run. So who's going to get out there? As we all know, Fangio's not a guy who likes to constantly cycle his defensive line. The top guys are going to get a ton of snaps, but I do think that edge 2 will see more rotation than he typically would have used in the past. And Keely Ringo versus Dory Jackson, unless they bring someone in, a guy I kept saying the name of was Reek Woolen. Now, the chances of a trade like that at this point are near zero. So I think I'm just going to assume that it's going to be Keely Ringo versus Jackson. And from what we've heard from Christian Parker, AJ Brown, and even some film, I think Keely Ringo is a solid cornerback. And his strengths and weaknesses are well defined. He's extremely good covering the deep part of the field in quarters. He'll come up, stick his nose in on like screen plays or outside runs. I think he's a fairly good tackler, and he's got some length to disrupt stuff when he's playing underneath zone coverage, but his lateral agility is just not good. So those slants, those dig routes, those are the type of things that are going to give him problems if he's asked to man up his guy on those kind of routes. So those two positions, I'm very excited to see who ends up winning. And this is something the Eagles have come out and said. Howie says, we want a lot of competition. And obviously that bore fruit last season. Now it's amazing that I guess Maddox got on the field, but they didn't really have any options until DeJean got healthy. But man, it's just going to be nice not to worry about a player like that getting on the field this upcoming season. Getting into the next one. I know I'm going rapid fire, guys. There's so many questions. I want to be able to hit everyone. So I probably, after like 2 or 3 more, I'll take one from the live audience. So next we got, how should Patullo adjust the offense this year? What should we see more or less of? And I've commented throughout the season about things I think that could benefit the offense if they added or also strip away plays that I don't like. So I really like this question. I'd love to see more runs from spread formations. And if the Eagles do get rid of Goddard, you're going to see that. They're not going to have a blocking tight end out there. They're not going to be able to justify 12 and 13 personnel formations as much. Get more light boxes for Saquon. You know, I think he's shown that he can really thrive when there's not a lot of muck and traffic in the middle. And it has the added benefit of making the reads really easy for Hurts. If you go back to the first Super Bowl against the Chiefs, they came out and did a ton of 5 wide, and Hurts was just reading the field extremely easily. I think that's the type of offense that benefits both players. I'd like to see a lot more designer routes for Smith and AJ, especially to beat zone coverage. You know, the Eagles were one of the best teams in the league against man coverage. You can basically have those guys run any route in the playbook and win against man coverage. But it's not the case against zone. You really do need specific concepts to be able to stretch those zones, play on time, and hit guys in the voids there. I think the Eagles are likely to see league high rates of zone coverage. Just looking at analytics, you can see like Hurts is a god against man coverage, and then he's immortal against zone coverage. So it makes sense with a target on your backs that teams are really going to lean into that defensively. The lateral QB run plays, I would completely extinguish those. They were terrible last year, but the north-south ones were great. You can think of a play where Hurts gets it. It's a QB lead play. You just have Barkley barreling through the middle as a lead blocker. Hurts right behind him. Maybe throw in a polar if you want. And I think those are highly successful. If Shane and Johnny are watching, this is something they talk about all the time. Now, there is one play that's more of a lateral run that they love, which is that QB counter bash play. But that has the benefit of you have like Lane Johnson and the guards coming across the formation to lead for Hurts. So it kind of alleviates some of those concerns about lateral quickness, because it ultimately does turn into a north-south run once he gets past the line of scrimmage. The split zone dump offs, for anyone who was fans of Philly Film Room, it's something we talked about ad nauseum. It's essentially you have the tight end coming across after the snap, coming across the formation behind the offensive line, and then you just dump it off to him. If it's Goddard, Calcaterra, all those guys are good in yak situations. It's just such an easy read. Teams don't generally recruit a lot of defensive resources to stopping it. It's one of the best plays in football. I would nuke the bubble screen game. Now, they did reduce their rates from early in the season, which was a welcome sight. But, I mean, if you recall, early in the season, they were having like Britton Covey lead block for Devontae. It's a terrible play. It has no chance of working, even if you have the numbers advantage. So I'd get rid of that. If you really want to get wide receiver screen game going, there are better options like tunnel screens, where ultimately you have the offensive line blocking for the receiver as he's coming in towards the formation. I think they'd have a lot more success with something like that. Triangle reads for Hurts. In a layman's terms, basically, this is having route combinations that develop in a way where the quarterback can have eyes on all three receivers at the same time, generally flooding zones, 3 versus 2 defenders. And, you know, it can even make it so the read is based off leverage and spacing rather than like waiting for a guy to get open. It was something that we talked about last season. Hurts, he's just a little bit late to pull the trigger. I think a lot of that is attributable to him being turnover averse. So if you're a second late to throw, you're just going to have a smaller window. Luckily, he's highly accurate. But I like him a lot better when he hits that back foot and fires. Kurt Warner, Baldinger are both guys who talked about how he's a lot better player when he plays on time. Full field, the opposite of that is like these full field pure progression plays where you're working 1, 2, 3 across the formation. Potentially for him, it's more like 1, 2, maybe look at the dump off and then scramble. It's, there was just so many times where he got 1, 2, got kicked out of the pocket and then had to throw it away. I'd like to see more over the ball routes. It was when I was scouting Pittsburgh, it was something that helped Russell Wilson tremendously. And he's a quarterback who compares very closely to Hurts, at least at the 2018 version of Wilson. The film just looks quite similar. And a common complaint about Wilson throughout his career is being late. And Pittsburgh really was able to speed him up by having Warren or Najee Harris run basically 3 to 5 yards right over the center and turn around. It's unguarded. And it's something I kept talking about before they played Pittsburgh is the Eagles have to take this away. And they did. So luckily, Fangio was keen to that. But it's like a cheat code in offense. If you don't, your first couple guys don't get open, you could just dump it off and then you just have Saquon Barkley with space. And same side toss plays is something I specifically like out of shotgun. We know they're going to run a ton of shotgun. So I think that was a pretty comprehensive answer there. Let's see. Next. Do you see a league-wide alignment in team building strategy? Were there fewer draft steals this year because of this? That's a good question. It's very easy to like read the tea leaves it's easy to like look at what a team did and then just in the back of your head say, oh, they're just copying what the Eagles did, when it may not necessarily be the case. So I'm not necessarily the biggest believer in this in general, but I think teams are starting to value athleticism even more, and the type of skill sets and physiques that are coming out of college are changing. And due to the nature of college schemes, what they ask of their players, it's a different type of athlete, different skill set. And I think this trickles up to the NFL. And we're seeing it, especially with like the linebacker and tight end positions. Both have slimmed down, become more agile, but not as strong. And the Eagles were able to exploit that last year with Saquon running behind those 5 offensive linemen who are historically large. If you look at height and weight, they're up there with all time in the NFL. So that kind of gives them an advantage with all these like tiny linebackers and safeties in the NFL. And, there is always a little copycatting of the best teams, especially the Super Bowl champion. And I think there are specific examples of that. But it's not something that I think, gets too crazy. Were there fewer draft steals? I don't think so. Fortunately, I don't have an attribution for this next question. The Eagles had to prioritize certain roster holes in the draft. Was that purely opinion, or is there analytical justifications? I think even before the draft, the Eagles could field a fairly complete roster. Yes, Sidney Brown, Ringo Steen, Trotter Jr., they're not ideal starters, but look at other teams' depth charts. They have players like that, more players like that starting without the high-end talent that the Eagles have. So I think you can still win with them. They obviously significantly upgraded their linebacker and safety holes. Seem to have a plan for tight end. I don't know what that is. Now, if you told me they just lose Goddard and they're rolling Calcaterra and Harrison Bryant out there, yes, I'm going to be concerned. Picked up Jordan Davis's fifth-year option, and they'll probably want to extend Ojoma. So I think maybe you could say they should have targeted an edge earlier than the 6th round. Before the draft, I said I thought it was a really deep edge class. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where it's like, oh, it's a deep class. Just wait to the 6th round. And they did that. And by all accounts, they got a player above where they should have gone based off the consensus rankings. But maybe they could have splurged for higher-end talent. By all accounts, the prices to move up, especially in like the 2nd and 3rd rounds, were exorbitantly high. I may have paid them anyway. Now they're stuck, not necessarily stuck, but they have more picks than they know what to do with next year. It's not like you can package 5 picks together. So it'll be interesting to see what materializes next year. In terms of the analytical justification, I think, until you get some of these players get a decent sample size of NFL snaps, it's hard to get that kind of evaluation. But it's obvious. Something I talked about. It's obvious that they targeted players with certain skill sets, especially athleticism. All right, I want to take a question from everyone here, the live audience. So let's see. Okay, Ryan, this is quite a lengthy question. Talk about how the Birds on defense are transitioning into focusing more and prioritizing making the team into a great all-around pass coverage pass in the secondary and linebackers. Yes, the front 4 pass rush and sacks are still important, but they're not only relying on that. It is interesting. Fangio historically has been okay with some of these smaller secondary players, especially safeties. His draft record has 5-10 safeties all over it. It's something that I find a little peculiar. Not that it's bad. I 100% think Fangio is justified in having that preference. I think he likes the quickness. And, sometimes, Nick Eamon-Worry, I think, is a good person to bring up here because, yes, he checks all the boxes, in terms of athleticism, size, and strength and these kind of things. But he's not quite as nimble moving around the field. And to how he talked about it, you need speed in all areas. Yes, Eamon-Worry's straight line speed's amazing, but his change of direction is not nearly as good as Makuba's. It just can't be based on physics. So I think someone who can kind of backpedal into one area of the field, dissuade the quarterback, and then break on the ball the other way, that's kind of the type of functionality Fangio likes, and Makuba fits that. I'm worried, though. If teams do decide to play these heavy packages and commit to the run, even if they get down a score, it could be trouble. And that could get exacerbated even more if Jordan Davis gets hurt because they don't have anything behind him. So hopefully that answered your question. I also think the pass rush maybe was slightly overrated last year because people are anchored to what happened in the Super Bowl. They decimated this terrible Chiefs offensive line. And it makes it think like the pass rush was dominant the whole year. And I don't think that was quite the case. I think they were solid, but that's where they could still improve. And that's probably why they brought in so many designated pass rushers. All right. Going back to our mailbag. Forgot about Dre. What's your biggest concern heading into training camp? How would you address it? I mean, to me, it's Kevin Patullo. Is he ready to run an NFL offense? There are more contributors than just him, thankfully, to the offensive philosophy, the scheme, even play sequencing to a degree. That's a specific part of the offense that is, the arbiter of that is the offensive coordinator. You're not necessarily going to get Sirianni being like, oh, let's, rush it up the gut on first down and then do a play action on second down. So those kind of granular things come down to the offensive coordinator, and it can make a big difference. I see coordinators who call great plays totally out of sequence and it fails. I see other coordinators who call basic plays well sequenced and it works. So that's something I'm very curious to see next year. Generally, I do not think more cooks in the kitchen is better. But when you have zero experience, I'd rather there be more of a multi-person approach to that. So that's my biggest concern. Good Fun 23. Top 5 teams in your power rankings. Thoughts on Jihad Campbell as an edge, Keely Ringo's potential, which non-starter has the highest ceiling? So a 4-for-1 here. I'll just go rapid fire here. Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, Lions, Bills. Any order. There's so much variance. I would not argue with anyone changing the order. Jihad Campbell as an edge. He has really good get off and burst. And I'm someone who's fought against this early narrative that they drafted him and has an edge. Now the narrative seems to have changed. Very limited move set. Really, he's got this dip move where he goes underneath the tackle or a quick swipe. His bend's really good. He's, overall, he's just a really limber, explosive athlete. He has almost no power whatsoever. If you were to ask him, even with a runway, if you were to ask him to just do a speed to power move, he's getting almost no initial knockback and almost no leg drive after that. That's why I suggest he put it on 10 pounds. He has speed to spare. So if he got a tick slower, but let's say 25% better play strength, that trade-off is well worth it, in my opinion, and he'd be better as an edge. So as it is now, I'd much prefer him as a off-ball, especially because you get more impact from him blitzing than you would just lining him up as a true edge rusher. Keely Ringo's potential, I talked about it a little bit earlier. I'm a Ringo fan. We talked about his strengths and weaknesses being very defined. As a linear athlete, he's good. Laterally, not as good. So, I'm pretty bullish on him. I think he can be an average corner. Which non-starter has the highest ceiling? I think it is a tricky question. The player that came to mind for me was actually Ben Van Sumeren. Looks like he's transitioning to full-time fullback, but recall that when they used those sets, he was very effective. So much so that they brought in a new fullback, Blossomgame, after he went out for the season. And he has receiving chops too. He has some tight end in his background. So maybe it sounds a little crazy, but I do think his ceiling as a fullback maybe is like a tick below use check. I know that sounds insane. The other guy that came to mind was Smell Mondin. I probably have to work on the pronunciation there, but he's got a safety build. Let's call it what it is, but athleticism insane. He's basically an 80% version of Jihad Campbell. He's not as limber of an athlete, not as explosive, but I think he's a good insurance policy. And if he does fill out and gets coached up really well, I think, his ceiling's really high. Let me take one question from our live audience before I go back. Hopefully everyone, if you're appreciating this, throw a W in the chat if you're liking it. Otherwise, throw an L if you hate it. All right. Larry Love. Who's our speed guy in the passing game? Great question. I don't think there is one. Devontae, I think, is a really good deep threat once he gets those long strides going. He's got great long speed and separation ability deep, but it's something I talked about many times is that third receiver. You either want someone who's extremely good at clearouts, who can threaten the defense vertically, who's a great gadget weapon, or can be a dominant blocker. I don't think Dotson falls into any of those categories, and thus his impact on the game is doesn't produce what he should based off his talent level just because of that mismatch with the Eagles targeting their top two receivers so much. You want more of like a bit role for your last guy. All right, going back into the mailbag. Let's see what we got here. We did talk about plays I'd like to see a little bit earlier, but favorite offensive plays that are non-gimmicks, the split zone play action. Play they used to run that I still love is Andy Reid when they ran the red zone shovel passes. You can't fumble it. It's an incomplete pass. If it doesn't work, they have road graders up the middle. They can give it to Goddard. I think that would be a great play. Short yardage situations as well. All right, moving in. John D. Who starts opposite Quinyon? Ringo. Shane Half. What's the surplus value of drafting an interior offensive lineman in round 1? Is it ever justifiable in the top 15? For people who don't know, I created a draft pick value algorithm based off the 2025 class specifically and the positional scarcity that existed at each group. So check that out on Twitter if you're interested. But I do think there is a misconception that the guard market has exploded and it's now a near premium position. The facts just don't back this up. Now, yes, there was, a few guys who got big money, like 20 plus million for middling guards. So it makes it seem like that. But I think there was more of like desperation plays, specifically like the 49ers. The truth is there's a ton of adequate guards in the NFL that are making less than 8 million per year. So you're paying a premium already if you draft one in the top 15. So if they're an all pro, yes, it's still great value. Doesn't matter if you get someone of that talent level at any position at any point in the draft, it's great value. Otherwise, it's a potential disaster. We've seen how badly teams misevaluate guards even in the first round. So if it works out decently, you just got requisite value. It has to be like a home run grand slam for it actually to generate any surplus value. So it's a tough pick. Next, we'll get into Rusty Supernaut. How do you envision Fangio using the new rookies? I think Campbell will play 75% of his snaps as an off-ball linebacker, and they'll have checks at the line depending on the offensive formation or even designer calls that bring him up as an edge rusher. And I think they'll use him to blitz quite a bit. I think Makubo will get to play a lot of inside quarter assignments. And for people, it's something I'll put on Twitter. I have committed to like doing a Vic Fangio lesson of the week where I'll put up a clip of a coverage with a diagram and then explain exactly what transpired in that play. And hopefully this will help kind of people understand the mechanics of some of these coverages, what they're trying to accomplish. And when you're like in one of those inside quarters in cover 4, you do have the ability to rob crossing routes if you don't have any like vertical routes that may be in your zone or coming behind you from across the field. So Makuba, someone with amazing peripheral vision. So if he's like, okay, I don't got to worry about my quarter, immediately he's starting to look for those like 10 to 15 yard in breakers. And I think he'll be able to make plays on the ball in those situations and match up against inside wide receivers in man coverage situations.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
This episode is brought to you by the Toyota Grand Highlander. From daily routines to life-changing adventures, the Toyota Grand Highlander is spacious, powerful, and ready to take on life's grand challenges. Advanced safety features and innovative technology give you confidence for whatever life throws at you. And it's available in a hybrid Nightshade Special Edition, which includes sophisticated gloss black exterior accents and 20-inch black alloy wheels. Learn more at toyota.com/Grand Highlander. Toyota, let's go places.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
Walmart Business is in the business of saving you time, money, and hassle. Whether your business started in a garage or is a garage, Walmart Business has the tools to help you get where you're going. Tools like free shipping, multi-user accounts, and just about any item your company needs.
Even a double filtration cyclone dust collector.
Yep, even that.
Sweet.
Walmart Business. It's the Walmart you love. Now for your business. Learn more at business.walmart.com. Terms apply.
All right. Eric. Any players the Eagles drafted that I like or dislike, but the data doesn't support your opinion? I'm glad you asked this because, admittedly, I'm someone who has a passion for the statistics and I post visualizations on Twitter all the time. But I think it does give this idea that I value it to a tremendous degree when I'm looking at players, and it's not the case. I think it's another piece of information that I use to inform my opinions, but the film, it has a much higher importance when I'm evaluating. I think there are strong statistical and physical measurement indicators for almost every single player they drafted. Campbell, he led Alabama in everything, and he's an athletic juggernaut. Makuba is extremely quick, and he had 99th percentile zone coverage grade from various charting services like Sumer Sports and PFF. Players they didn't go after that I liked were David Walker and Braden Swinson, two late-round edge rushers, but there's a lot of things in their profiles that would turn teams off. David Walker will be 25 in his rookie season, and he played in the lowest level of college football you can. So obviously that's a projection, but once I saw him do really good at the Senior Bowl, I was sold on him. His also not ideal measurements or athleticism. Swinson, he's similar. 1 year production, not the youngest guy in the world, not the most athletic. He was basically a pressure machine at LSU. I don't know. I can't substantiate this, but people say maybe he had conflicts with coaches, so that maybe pushed him down the board. Pure film grade, he was probably like an early third rounder, something like that. Someone I liked, and I'm interested to see how he'll do. I believe he went to the Patriots. All right. Jim Regan. Can you touch on this comparison for Jihad Campbell and Andrew Van Ginkel? I heard it from McMullen and thought it was the best take I heard. Can you go deeper? You know, I'm someone who's been a fan of Van Ginkel for quite a while. I wanted the Eagles to get him last offseason, but he went for pretty big money, $10 million, and then he just got a big raise. He's going to get $23 million, but what an awesome player. I envision Campbell playing a similar ratio of snaps in the duties that were asked of Van Ginkel, but I see them as distinctly different players. Maybe not as when he came in the league, but now Van Ginkel is a densely built, like strong as an ox player who just has like solid acceleration, speed, and change of direction, while Campbell is very wiry, lean, and he has elite movement ability in all facets, whether it's getting up to speed or changing direction. So yeah, to me, he's just like a faster, leaner version, but what they'll be asked should be fairly similar. Probably a little bit more biased towards off ball for Campbell for those same reasons. All right, we got 2 more mailbags, and then I'm going to start opening it up to some live comments and questions. Sketchlessant. I'm not going to get that one. Sketchellant. Which unheralded player on both offense and defense you think will have the biggest surprise impact this season? Offense, I talked about him before, is Ben Van Sumeren. I love their plays with him as a lead blocker, and he has secret receiving chops too. So perfect candidate for surprise impact. Everyone else is so obvious so it kind of really narrows down the options there. On defense, I just posted about him. The unheralded player is Blankenship. You know, I'm someone who's going back and just watching film of random games from the middle of the year, and he's just always playing solid. He'll take on a bigger role as a leader and communicator this year, now with Slay gone, even to some extent with Dean out early in the season, no green dot. I think Bond will get the green dot, but Blankenship will contribute a lot to getting the secondary aligned, you know, communicating with Makuba especially. So you got 2 second-year players, a 22-year-old, a rookie. So there's just so many guys that need to get on the same page there who are young. All right. Quintanamo Bay. What first got you interested in breaking down film, analyzing contract projections? Luke Kuechly. Luke Kuechly was the first college player I ever scouted. And anyone who would listen to me at that time, I don't even know what my age was, some teenager. I tell everyone how amazing he is. And then once he turned into an all-pro, I felt like, oh, I got a knack for this, picking out talent. And in the last few years, I started reading a lot of books, watching coaching clinics, talking to actual coaches about scheme, learning about technique from Nick at Philly Film Room. I consider myself someone who is always trying to learn more. And then whatever I learn, I'm conveying to you guys. I got interested in contracts, probably playing Madden, focusing on the team building aspect in franchise mode, and then started learning more about how they operated in real life. And I talked to people who knew a lot more about it than me. I studied the CBA, but it's something you can go wrong with easily because the public-facing websites just have inaccuracies all over them. Every single time I post about contracts, I have someone saying, but OTC or Spotrac said this. And so that's just a losing battle. But I will promise that if I ever post something about contracts, I've vetted it. So you can probably trust what I have to say about it. I looked into creating a more accurate model than Spotrac or PFF. Now, the fact that it did turn out that way, I figured out how the NFL, that the discourse between agents and the teams, how they actually determine what players' values are. And it's nothing that crazy. It's like, how young are you? What's the trajectory of your production? What position do you play? And then you just slot the guy right in between 2 existing contracts, and you come up with a fairly accurate number. So it was pretty cool. I mean, once the numbers started coming out and I was hitting them right on the nose, my mind was blown. So I kind of got excited about that. So that wraps up the mailbag. I'll probably take a few questions here from our live audience. So if you got a question, throw it out there. In the meantime, I'll pick one out that was asked earlier in the episode. Larry Love, who's your first candidate to restructure in his year or into the next? Where do you see Howie's financial outlook in terms of keeping this talent 2 to 3 years down the line? Well, the team's locked in for the next 2 years. You're talking 2025, 2026. All their Pro Bowlers are locked in. And then they're just kind of trying to fill out the periphery, inject depth into the team. That's really what they accomplished in the draft. In terms of restructures, I think we just got to come out and say almost everyone in the Eagles' base salary is the minimum. So there is no restructure. At this point, it would come down to ripping up contracts and signing new ones. So there's not going to be a lot of funny money. The only where that could come into play is if they trade for a guy who has future base salaries that are fairly large. A guy that we could bring up is Jalen Ramsey. I believe his base salary in 2026 is like $14 million. Hopefully I'm not giving misinformation here. Let me just make sure that's true. Okay, $10 million. So in a situation like that, then you are able to stretch out the money at any point if you want to restructure, but not the case for existing players on the roster. All right, kind of go through some of these. David, how's it going? Which one of the offensive linemen drafted has the best chance of developing into a starter? Offensive line is the position group which I have the least expertise. So I'll come out and say that what I do there is I try to figure out who are the subject matter experts and kind of find an average of all of their opinions. And Miles Hinton seems the guy that sticks out. You know, everyone knows he's absolutely massive, like 6'7" nearly, and 320 something pounds. They just said his hand usage is bad, but his movement ability and obviously his power is good. So he's a perfect candidate for Stoutland to teach him technique, to mitigate his weaknesses, and potentially become a good tackle. I don't necessarily see him as like a Becton guy where you move him into guard, but once again, I'm not an offensive line guru. Bird Brain, who is someone we drafted you project having a bigger role than fans think? Not Makuba or Cam. Well, I mean, Ty Robinson has got to be the guy. You know, they're pretty thin in the interior defensive line. I don't think Ajoma is going to get 700 snaps, probably. So I think you're going to see probably like Ajoma get slightly more snaps than Robinson, and Davis will be maybe a tick more than he had last year. So he'll still be like not a high snap guy, in my opinion, for Davis. It just doesn't make sense. You want to maximize his ability on early downs, and he's not nearly the pass rusher that Ajoma is. But Ty Robinson, he kind of is a tweener between both of those. He played some nose tackle in college. He played some edge in college. So he's a guy you can move around, and I think he'll get snaps for sure. Who do you think will start at linebacker? Vaughn and Campbell. You're worried about CB2, Fly Eagles Fly. Why? What is keeping Irene so calm? I think it's that the Eagles would have invested more resources in another corner if they were that worried about it. Ringo is 22 years old. It makes sense that he wouldn't have got onto the field until now. And I don't think it's lip service when these guys are talking positive about him. And this is pure speculation on my part. I think Ringo's the type of player who the more confidence he has, it will pay dividends. Even going back to college, you could see before his confidence got broke and he got destroyed by Marvin Harrison. he was really good. So I think that's why maybe the coaches and other players are building him up a little bit. But if he does play confident, he's got the skill set to succeed out there. And also, Adoree Jackson's not a bad player. He's definitely declining a little bit, but there may be a little bit of this, like, Giants are so poor at maximizing their players. Once you get them into a good organization, they just play better. And then we saw that with Saquon. We might see that with Ojulari and Jackson. Who of the undrafted free agents has a better chance of cracking the final 53? I think Holland Pierce. He's right in that mold with, like, Hinton. Absolutely massive, unrefined prospect. But from what I've heard, he maybe has a little bit more potential to move into guard. So we'll see what happens. Who won't make the team that might surprise fans? Oh, that's a great question. Goddard. There is a real scenario where Goddard gets cut. If teams say, why would we give you a conditional sixth? If you're willing to take that, you're going to cut him. And he's got $15.5 million cash due. So we'll just wait. And then the Eagles may say, yeah, but 20 teams want him, so you got to trade us the sixth. So I think that's kind of the haggling going on right now. But if they get frozen out, which may or may have not happened in the draft, they might end up cutting Goddard. Sounds crazy, but it's not impossible. What do you think went wrong with Bryce Huff? Yeah, that's a tough one. I think, he showed that he really struggled to play the run, just getting completely washed out of plays, being undisciplined, freelancing, finding himself on the ground. And then when he got those designated pass rush snaps, he just wasn't effective. I think a little bit of it was like him beating up a lot of bad tackles in 2023. And then I went back and watched pretty much all his pass rushes, and a lot of them, he's getting nice bend around the corner, and then he just got shoved to the ground. Once the offensive tackle was able to get hands on him, they could just plow him into the ground because his core strength just was not good enough. So then he got injured, fell out of favor for players who were playing good, like Jalix Hunt. All right, keep going. Appreciate it. How do you get so knowledgeable about football? Just immersing yourself. I've been a football fanatic since I was 5 years old. I played football into high school, and once I realized I was way too small to do anything, I just quit and saved my brain. But whether it was through just being a huge fan of the team, playing Madden, playing with my friends, I was always just immersing myself in football. And then in the past few years, really trying to advance that knowledge. Like I said earlier, coaching clinics, reading books, probably most importantly, talking to people who know a lot. I had the ability to go on a podcast with like Match Quarters, Cody Alexander, who's like a defensive coverage guru. And I bought the defensive coverage glossary from Cameron Soren, and then I read books from Bobby Peters about game planning and schemes. I got to talk with Kurt Warner. So just really trying to pick people's brains, digest a ton of content, watch myself come to my own conclusions, just trying to be like a good observer. I think that's all contributed. Well, who's the backup running back? I'm not a Dylan fan. I actually wanted them to draft the running back. Bayshaw Tootin was one of my draft crushes. I think he's not just a pure linear speed back. I think he's a pretty well-rounded back overall. So I'm curious to see what he does. I forget what team. If he went to the Browns, what team did he go to? Jaguars. Interesting. Okay, so he's stuck behind a few guys, but yeah, A.J. Dillon. I don't hate A.J. Dillon. I think people pigeonhole him as a power back because of his size, but it's just not accurate the way he runs. It's way more like LeGarrette Blount, where he kind of tippy toes and like more of a finesse runner who happens to be 240 something pounds. He's got receiving chops. He can pass block. So, he's not obviously not an explosive play threat, but he can come in and give you good snaps, and he's fairly well-rounded. But if Saquon goes down and he's your RB1, that's not good. And I'm not a giant Shipley fan. It's just he's not super elusive. He's got great speed, but for a guy of that stature, I'd want them to be shiftier. So, they also Davis Price, I think, is still on the roster, so it'll be interesting if they keep 4 backs or if they play that practice squad game where they'll bring a guy up a few times and give him some looks. I'm interested to see how that transpires, but they got to start thinking about the future. I mean, Saquon's shelf life could be anything from 1 game to 3 years, so like you'd probably want to inject some young talent in there who has better upside than Shipley. Power rank the biggest needs. Edge rusher who can play the run. To me, that sticks out. And then tight end if they trade Goddard. That's what immediately came to mind. So probably take about 3 more questions and then get out of here. I appreciate all of you guys for coming. Next episode, it's going to be something different. It's not going to be just me going through a million mailbag questions. It may be a film breakdown. It may be an esteemed guest. So I might see what you guys want to see and then go from there. It's going to be dynamic. The next assistant coach leaving for a bigger coaching gig. I'll say bigger because I don't want to shoehorn head coach gig in there. So I think Christian Parker, he could become a defensive coordinator easily. That sticks out like a sore thumb. Who is more important to the Eagles' success, Clint Hurt or Christian Parker? To me, Christian Parker. The secondary, the fact that they took all those young guys and they probably played better than 2 rookie DBs have ever played in the history of the NFL. I mean, that's just incredible. So overall, I think the coverage was more important than the pass rush last year. Just sitting there watching every single play back from both end zone and sideline views. You're never going to completely, extricate one from the other. And so, both are important. But for the Eagles specifically, I thought their coverage was like an A grade and their pass rush was like a B+. So Shipley goes down if you breathe on him. Yep, I don't like that. Why didn't Stout get the offensive coordinator job? I think, it takes him away from some of his duties, which is developing offensive line prospects from nothing burgers to all pros. So he's just so good at what he does. I don't even know to what extent he desires that job. I do believe he's like interviewed for that in the past. But it's like, I'd rather just give him a pay raise and let him keep doing what he's doing. Depth at wide receiver. Yeah, I mean, it's something I talked about earlier. Dotson doesn't have the skill set that would most benefit a wide receiver 3 in the Eagles offense due to how much they target those top 3 guys and even Saquon to some degree in the passing game. So I would have liked to bring in a wide receiver in the draft. They brought in Jalen Lane for a 30 visit. I thought it was almost like a shove it to the media / fan base of like, we're not going to bring in a single guy that we did for a 30 visit, or just a message to the league like, this isn't a perfect barometer for who we're going to target, and you have to change up your strategy sometimes, especially with a target on your back after winning the Super Bowl. But I am a little surprised that they didn't bring in like a 6th rounder wide receiver. A guy I have said banging the drum for a while is Noah Brown. I mean, between his blocking and clear out routes, it would be literally a match made in heaven. And if one of your top guys go down, he can come in and moonlight as a real X receiver and get 100-something yards. He's done that in the past. What would you rather have, Shane's full beard or Johnny's British accent? British accent by a mile. You can take someone with 100 IQ, give them a British accent, and to American listeners, they sound like Einstein. So I would take that accent in a heartbeat. Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to take one more question. So whatever pops up next, and then we're going to head out of here. I hope you guys all appreciated this. And if you're not listening live, hope that this was a good first episode and you learned something. See if we can get one more question in here. If you didn't get a chance to get your questions answered, submit them. I'm going to have an ongoing thread where you can submit them. All right, I got two more. Drums or flats? Flats. You can just get more of the meat off. Will Jalen Hurts improve? I think he will. I think Hurts turned a corner at the end of the year where he finally found the midpoint between turnover aversion and playing on time. And that's such a hard balance to strike. Early in the season, it was like, guys open, I'm not going to throw it because there's a 0.1% chance of an interception. And then by NFC Championship, it was like back foot, boom. And it worked amazing. And so I think he learned that he could take on a tiny bit more risk and still be more effective. And, he got healthier. Remember, he was dealing with that knee for a while. I think it's something that lingers a little bit. And then he took the governor off in the playoffs, and his running was incredible. So hopefully you guys all enjoyed the first episode of The Edge. So, yeah, the plan is Thursdays, 7 p.m. Eastern. See ya.